People blame the Most High for everything wrong in the world today and wonder why He doesn't help, but yet they don't turn to Him. For example, pray to Him. Hello, today is November 1st, 2020, and the time is 10:01 a.m. Had a interesting conversation with someone recently, and it had to do with the Most High, God, our Creator. And they were saying or asking, well, why doesn't the Most High stop what's happening in the world? And it's not a complex topic to address, but there's some depth to it, and there needs to be some understanding. So, and this goes all the way back to Genesis 2, and how the human creation had made a choice to, for example, whether it be literal or a metaphor, that's not the point here, but to eat from the tree of knowledge, the fruit. And that right there that was the decision that the human creation had made, and that spread through pretty much inviting what is going on throughout human history and today. And when we look, for example, through scripture, where the Most High has intervened and, for example, had like Sodom and Gomorrah wiped out these two cities, people say, well, that's not a very loving God, the Most High. But when He lets things play out and lets human beings, the human creation, make their choice, well, why isn't He intervening? So basically, it's an argument where no matter what the Most High does, He can't win. And yes, like they say, for example, well, the Most High can just get rid of, as a descriptive, evil. And we'll use that as a descriptive encompassing everything. And why did He allow, for example, the fallen to do what they did? And why did He allow the human creation to follow them? Well, that has to go along with free will. And usually the argument there is, well, you can't just rely on free will. Well, yes, you can, because that's what it's all about. And if you look to prior to all this, the argument was, and still could be, if the Most High basically programmed the human creation and these other species, angelic or whatever, to say love Him and follow Him and obey Him, well, there's no, the argument is, well, is it real then? So if the Most High was to impose that again, then these people would say, well, that that's not really love or anything else. Well, it's a no-win situation. But people have to understand that the human creation in this world that we live in is only part of a bigger picture going on. As I stated, there's other species, say angelic, that play a role in this, and there's things going on above us. And I'm just going to interject here. A lot of people talk about these theories of multiple dimensions and time travel and everything else. Well, time is a tool to measure change. And there's no such thing as other dimensions. There's other places, and people have asked, well, where are these other places? Well, below us, above us, and around us. And I'll leave it at that. So yes, when people start wanting to challenge the Most High and what He does or doesn't do, they try to play it so that no matter what's said, they try to debunk it as a descriptive, and then trying to omit key elements. For example, free will, which is a big part of it. The Most High created life to love life, and all he ever asked for was for life to love and respect him back. In return, he provided everything. And by providing everything, there was no need to have knowledge of all the wonders of his creation. Whereas, as a descriptive, the enemy of the Most High and those who followed him offered that to the human creation. And, well, look at the world today. And it's the human creation's choice with that. And then this ties into people talking about wearing the armor of God, the Most High. And that reminds me, and this ties into my previous video, where I address the armor of God, the Most High. And it reminds me of something that Michael Wood Jr., former Baltimore police officer, said about people who become police. And this ties into the cycles of civilization and the majority and everything else. And I talk about this in other videos, where he said, just because someone has a badge and a gun doesn't mean they're not afraid, weak. And the same applies with this metaphor as a descriptive of the armor of God, where people say, oh, I'm going to have the armor of God, or I've put it on. You don't automatically become a strong person. You have to have a strong character to begin with. And this goes into the part of the vetting process. So in my previous video, I talk about people romanticizing everything and, you know, their role, who they are, and how things are going to play out. And this ties into prophecies and so forth, and how prophecies are actually based on the cycles of civilization, patterns, and human behavior in general, the foundations, how people, for example, react and everything else. And although I do speak about the liberal arts theoretical pseudoscience of psychology against it, this doesn't state or imply that there's no such thing as a descriptive mental illnesses, or people are not affected by events. There are patterns to that and a predictability to that, and these are all the types of things that are being used. But when you look at, for example, prophecies, and I've mentioned John Levy in several videos, and what he talks about how he uses photographs to show, well, these structures, for example, don't fit in the timeline of the official narrative, and he's onto something. He's not claiming to have the answers, at least not yet, but if he continues on the direction that he's going, there's something there, because there is something going on that even, for example, Christians in Scripture hasn't really addressed. And this ties into so he is looking at it from the angle of these structures, buildings, etc., and mud floods. There's something going on. I'm looking at it from the angle of, when you look at these artifacts found in solid granite that's supposed to be millions, billions, trillions years old, and it doesn't, like, how do those artifacts become part inside of solid granite? And we see these artifacts, for example, there's like pickaxes and watches, and the most interesting one that I like to focus on is the foot in the boot, and that boot dates back to the late 1800s, early 1900s. What event took place? Now, one of the things that he's touched up on is the great electrical storm. And somebody had emailed him about this great electrical storm and how it devastated parts of the world. And there's a connection there, but there's not enough information to make a properly informed conclusion yet, anyway, to say, well, what's really going on. So that's one of the reasons why I took or have taken an interest in his work and his efforts. And it's impossible for any one individual to examine every single topic and then try to tie it all together. There's a dedication of, for example, in his case, where, it appears that's where his focus is, which is great. And then there's other people doing the same type of thing, trying to, understand a specific topic. And as I've said in previous videos, my skill set is taking all different information and putting it together. And, when it comes to law, I'm not posting or anything, but, that's a skill set that's really needed for law, because you're trying to take in information of different positions of a case and incorporating precedents and everything else, but I digress. So yes, there's something really going on. And then when we tie into the end time prophecies, for example, when you look at even the Native Americans who have their prophecy, and they have this line thing and different events, and they're saying, well, we had the Great Fire, the Great Flood. There was, I think, 4 have already happened, of extinction level events, we'll call it. And the 5th one is supposed to be some sort of plasma destruction, which is electrical. And imagine if what we think is supposed to happen has already happened, and we're living in the aftermath, and everything that we have is residuals from the time before. We wouldn't know, because, again, history is forgotten either by chance or design, and we repeat the cycles of civilization, etc. Just something to think about. There's something there. There's something going on. And then there's a bunch of other different things that, as a descriptive, maybe a little bit more woo-woo, but I'm not going to address it in this video. So with these end time prophecies and how the world is and how there's all this control and everything else, whatever's being imposed on the population, we're going to focus just on today, current events and everything. And say recent history, whoever, whatever is imposing evolves. And this reminds me of the movie Predators. And I'm not one to be trying to draw parallels with movies and stuff, and it has nothing to do with what I'm about to say. Has nothing to do with the movie itself, as much as there's a scene in the movie where they're talking about how the predators take all these different species and hunt them down, and if, say, for example, in the case of the scenario in the movie, human beings actually beat them, they evolve their strategies, their armor, their equipment, whatever, to not have any weaknesses in whatever their hunts or their battles. And the same type of idea applies to whatever is being imposed. When, say, for example, a new scenario comes up, or a unique individual, could be from the Most High, comes into the picture that they haven't experienced, and it starts to cause a ripple in their agendas. They start to evolve and try new things, and etc. So this is all part of our reality, whether you want to accept it or not. This is the world we live in. And a lot of people, especially when you get into philosophers, and philosophy complicates the uncomplicated. What's the meaning of life? Why am I here? And so many, you hear this even among Christians. Why am I here? What's going on? Because they've taken key elements, the important elements out of the equation to understand who they are, why they're here. And I'm setting aside the fact of the majority being, as a descriptive, empty shells or NPC types, but that I've addressed that in other videos. So with how things are playing out in the world today, one of the biggest things that we see unfolding on a worldwide scale, like we haven't seen before, or at least that we're aware of, is this surveillance. And a lot of people are, oh, the government is going to, there's have us under surveillance, and a lot of people are pointing at these cameras all over the place and everything else. But these very same people forget one thing, that it's actually the population that has put themselves under surveillance, for example, through compliance. And this all ties into patterns, cycles of civilization. Anyway, that's all I really want to say. Things to think about. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.